If you want to learn how to make Ghibli style textures in Substance Painter, the latest course from the 3D coloring book was made for you. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to consider getting the course. Now let's get into this week's video.
Hey everyone. Today I want to talk to you about my environment, the garden, which is on the screen right now. It is going to be a breakdown tutorial of this environment piece. I'm going to talk about stylization and just a broad range of topics of how I created this and what I think was successful and all that. So let's just get right into it. The 5 core things that I want to talk to you guys today about is first, concept and ref, composition, lighting, my approach to stylization, and modeling and texturing. I will go over all of these topics kind of briefly, but I'll cover a lot of bases really fast. So for concept and reference, I want to start off with, first off, gathering a lot of ref before you start a project is very important. For me, it helps me flesh out an idea and I take away a lot of things from the reference that I've gathered. For example, I found this building when I was looking for reference, and this is the one that stuck. And I tried to make this building and also make it stylized and make it work with my environment. As you can see here, for the final shot, you see the building that I captured in my ref. So yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of reference gathering. For concept art, it's really beneficial to kind of actually make like thumbnail pieces and trying to render out a full concept piece. But I personally didn't do that for this environment. Instead, I just took a completely different approach, something I didn't really know if it was going to work out or not, but it actually ended up in my favor. Instead of concepting on Photoshop or whatever digital concepting software, I decided to concept in Unreal itself. I blocked out the scenes, and it's not such a crazy idea, honestly, but I don't think it's usually done often. And for my scene, I knew I wanted the building that you see in each shot. I wanted that to be the focal point. So all my scenes kind of has that as the focal point, and they're all kind of different concepts. So I have pretty much 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or that's the same one. 5, 6, 7. So I have 7 thumbnail sketches, if you'd say, and they're all made in Unreal, blocked out, and I'm just trying to get the ideas flowing. And this process is actually kind of a stepping stone for if you want to then take whichever block out that you liked and just going into Photoshop and actually painting over the picture. I think that's also a very good process, but I was kind of just concepting as I went on with the project. So instead, I just picked the one I chose, or picked the one I liked the most, which was this one right here. And I decided to just go with that one. And so let's see, we have this. This is how it started out pretty much. In terms of the concept, I wanted to make sure that I got the color palette from the start. I went to Coolers, which is kind of cool. All right, anyway. I went to Coolers and I kind of just picked out my color palette. I think I used one of these reference images that I've gathered. I think it was this one. And I put it into a color picking machine and came out. I just started randomizing until I found the right choice for me. And so I think it's very beneficial if you actually nail that at the beginning so that you're not worried about it later on, instead of having at least for this for Stylized specifically, I think it might be actually beneficial to plan out your colors, because stylized scenes often rely on colors in a way. Having the colors pop and have like some vividness to them is actually really good. So, oop, click off. There it is. So yeah, so for at least for the beginning, I planted out my colors. I just color picked off this color palette that I had, and made everything what I thought that, like, I mapped the colors to what I thought would be good. So that's as far as it goes in terms of the concept. I really didn't have any story to this until later. The story kind of developed as I went, and the concept also developed as I went. So there was not like a lot of pre-planning or pre-production in terms of that for this specific project. I want to talk to you about the composition now, because the composition is probably one of the most important parts of this piece, or at least one of my focuses. And I want to show you guys some cool things that I did to kind of help me change the composition and get it to where I wanted. So usually I would take my whatever progress pic I had of the environment, and I would kind of bring it into Photoshop. And now I personally really like this beginning composition from the get-go, because, well, one, this leading line here is very nice for, it's not only dynamic because it curves, but it's nice because it leads you right to the focal point, but also because there is a clear, very clear separation of midground, or sorry, foreground, which is this, midground, this thing here, and then everything else is the background. Everything around this piece here is the background. So all that. And I think that's really important for any composition, is to have a clear distinction between those, where you could even see it in like a thumbnail view. You could see that it holds up really well. You could really tell what everything is, even this far away. And that's a key ingredient to having a nice spicy composition. So basically, I took this into every time I had a new update on my piece, what I would do is I would take it into Photoshop, and I would use the black and white, which is in adjustments, and then I would use posterize, which is also in adjustments. And this always helped me to kind of see where my levels were in terms of my black and white values. And this is important to an extent. I think it's kind of important for you could see how your composition lines up when it's just two values. Having two values is really like seeing it in two values is really important, because that's how most people start their thumbnails when they're concept arting. You want to be able to have very clear distinction of shapes just in black and white. And right here, you could see that this piece has very successful areas where that's happening. Like, the building is silhouetted in a very nice way because the light side and the dark side are just balancing very well together. Not only that though, but there is a nice triangle that's happening here, which is really good with all the negative space. It's really good because it's kind of grounding the image. It's like an arrow pointing down, which, even though the focal point is here, not here, it kind of just encapsulates the focal point. And that's really, I think that part that was not intended from me at the beginning. But once I saw it in this view and I found out it was there, I just tried my hardest to keep it there and to like almost enhance it in a way. I added some of this stuff here, which kind of helped it a lot. So yeah, basically you want to go in with all your compositions and try this, because it's super helpful. It really is. It'll help you see the values. And there's not only this secondary, there's also, you can also go to the number 3, which is also really helpful. Kind of get an idea of how it looks with the grays once you add some grays in there. And you can see these really cool shapes forming once you do that. And if you just see the shapes, I think it's very helpful for anyone. Shapes are really important in any like art piece. It's one of the main fundamentals, basically. So yeah, so that's something I did a lot. And apart from that, I would also go to the filter gallery um, and use the cutout option. And this is also something that helped me a lot. Like I would use this constantly just to see all my values in a very simplified way. This helped me a lot because I think, you get to see where all your values are. It's really important to know what colors are in your scene and if they're harmonizing. Color harmony is very important, especially in environments. So right here, I mean, I think that this is all working very well because of it. Like you could see there's a clear definition of the foreground. Then there's like this weird gray midground, and then everything else is just a nice colorful haven. And it's really good because I think like usually the rule is to desaturate the foreground so that the background pops, or at least wherever your focal point is, you want your focal point to pop. So in my case, I really wanted to desaturate all of this so that the building was the thing that your eye was drawn to the most. So yeah, this was really important in my process, just going into filter gallery. Basically just me going back and forth between Photoshop and Unreal and trying to figure out what it needs and how it's looking. You could also do this and see it in a gray and white, black and white, so you could see how your midtones are doing, and then you could use the histogram to kind of gauge what it looks like, or like how your levels are doing. There seems to be like some spike here, but yeah. So that's pretty much in terms of composition and how I approach that. This is pretty much it. I made sure to just have a focal point. Made sure that the foreground, middle ground, and background were all reading very well, and just everything else is extra detail. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the composition. So we've gone over 2 of these pretty quickly too. So yeah, let's talk about lighting. Oof, my favorite. So this piece is heavily lit, and I think it's one of the most successful parts about this piece. I think the lighting is really good. Let's see. So there are 4 things to keep in mind when lighting a environment or a UE4 scene. So you want to focus on directional light. You want to make sure that's really good and it's pointed at your focal point. You want your skylight to also have, like, make sure the values are good on that. Usually with let me go into lighting mode. Usually I like to, specifically for stylized pieces, I like to make sure that it's colored, like the lighting is colored. For here I took like a teal value, but that could be anything. It could be like a purpley, it could be more purple, more green. It all just depends on what kind of mood you're trying to achieve or convey. So yeah, so for this scene, went with the skylight, 0.4. And as long as you're balancing that and your directional light, you should have no problem. These 2 are probably the most important to get correct at the beginning. Once you have these 2 like knocked out, you could start working with stuff like post-process. And I'd say my biggest tips for post-process is to, well, make sure the exposure is at 1. Obviously, I kind of put it at 0.9 here, and I think I did that for a specific reason because I was feeling it more. But, my biggest thing is to work with the contrast. I think contrast plays a big role in stylized pieces, and I think the more contrast with stylized, the better, because you want to have like a crisp, clean kind of feeling to your environment with stylized. And I think I'm kind of getting that in this. Like, all my values are pretty much from black to white and everything in between. Now, I'm not saying that there's complete black and whites, because that's not ever good to have. Like, this is like, if I had color picked this would be like a mid gray. Even my highest like point highlight here is probably not white, like completely white. and it's good to stray away from having anything be in the darkest dark or the lightest light. So yeah. So in terms of that, that's pretty much it. I'd say mess around with everything in post process to see how you feel about it, because post process is a very powerful tool. But never overdo it. It could get really messy really fast if you just start tweaking everything and then you go back to directional and skylight and you start messing with that. You want to have like a back and forth with these three tools. And then the last one I'd like to talk about is exponential high fog. Now this will save your environment. If it looks bad, it'll make it look good instantly. So this is how my environment looks without exponential high fog. It's totally different. Everything's darker. Everything's a little bit more grungy and weird. It just doesn't look right. But with exponential high fog, it's perfect. Like messing with volumetric fog and the fog density and everything. Those are the key ingredients here. You also want to make sure that your fog is colored for whatever specific mood you have. For this piece, I went with a yellow for the volumetric and a blue for the height fog. The difference here is that volumetric kind of encompasses the entire scene and fills it with like a fog surrounding it, but the exponential high fog kind of is in the background and more like if I move this, you could see it. It's more in the background, and it encompasses like the sky and stuff usually. So yeah, so those two you want to mess with a lot. So basically, yeah, those four things: directional light, skylight, exponential high fog, and post-process. Those four things are your main key ingredients for lighting a scene in Unreal. And just messing with all the values and trying to find what works for you. You could see here that I went through a lot of lighting passes, and it's just basically ideation at that point. You're trying to get the best lighting, so you're going back and forth. You change the lighting one day and you say you like it, right? But then the next day you put in some models and you're like, oh, this lighting isn't that good anymore, so I'm going to change it again. And you just keep going like that until you have something that's really good. And you can see the lighting changes drastically. The mood changes every time. And that's just because I keep changing the lighting to see what's the best for me. And I think when you're making a Unreal environment, especially when it's more conceptual like this, where I'm not really following a specific concept piece, environment art piece, I'm literally just concepting as I go. So it's a little bit more just explorative, I'd say. So yeah, that's for lighting. Those are the main four. And then there's one more thing with lighting that I want to talk about, is basically when to put in point lights and spotlights. For this environment, I wanted to make sure that I use the spotlights and the point lights to enhance whatever lighting I already have or had with the directional and the skylight. So basically, right here where the light is hitting the hardest, my directional light, I put like two point lights just so that it gives it more of a realistic feel, because there's like a gradation that's going across the like hottest point where the sun is hitting. So yeah, you see that gradient from this really highlight to all the way down. And then there's also something I did here with the blue where it's kind of a little bit like unrealistic, but it really works for this environment because it's stylized, where I'm adding like a blue light here as rim lighting to give that kind of like, to carve out the shape of the building. And I think it really works. I think without it, it kind of feels a little flatter and more boring. And yeah, so basically you want to look for opportunities like that. And pretty much, I have a spotlight here to highlight the character a little bit and the grass so that my grass kind of gets lit up a little bit, and create like more opportunities for highlights and like distinguish the shadow shapes from the highlights. So yeah, that's pretty much as far as lighting goes. I think those are the main ingredients to getting nice lighting. So yeah, let's see how we're doing on time here. Ooh, okay, we're on 19 minutes. We're doing pretty good. So let's see. So we've knocked out 3 things, which is really nice. I hope that by now you guys have at least gotten some new information that you guys could use. Okay, so my approach to stylization. I want to keep this really simple, really sweet, and really easy to understand. Basically, how I see stylized is the enhancement of shapes, the enhancement of colors, and the enhancement of anything that's out of the ordinary. So when you're building a stylized environment or a stylized piece, like a prop, anything character, you want to look for points where you can exaggerate, whether that be architecturally, whether that be with the lighting, whether that be with the colors, how vivid they are, how saturated they are, how bright they are, stuff like that. Try to have purpose to your exaggerations when you're creating a stylized scene. Like, for example, for this scene, I added a lot of bloom because I think sometimes stylized pieces can benefit from having like this otherworldly type of like bloom to them. So, and that really works for this. If I was making a more realistic piece, I probably wouldn't add as much bloom or bloom at all. So yeah, you want to look for opportunities like that, and that's how I approach all stylization. The biggest thing with stylization that a lot of people miss, and I think a lot of people don't understand, is that they make something, and let's say it's like an error, they just say it's stylized. And that's not really stylization. It should have purpose at the end of the day, and it should also, very important, look natural. It should really look natural. It shouldn't just be like a blunder and you say, hey, that's stylized because, you know, it looks a little bit off from my reference image. No, it should be purposeful. So yeah, that's pretty much how I see stylized. Like, you can tell, like, the lighting is very stylized. You could tell this fern, obviously, it was purposeful for me to make the cards and curve them in this way. It wasn't just like a blunder that I stumbled upon. So yeah, that's pretty simple, I think, to understand. And one thing, another thing that is very important with stylized, I think the best way to approach at least shape design and detailing is make sure that you're focusing on your big shapes and your medium shapes. Small shapes can still be incorporated. Like for this specific, I have these really small textural details, like the trim and the brick texture, but it's not really, you don't really need it to sell the piece overall holistically. It's kind of more if you want to add a specific flair. I don't think it's needed. I think it's more about getting just the overall large and medium shapes and making sure those look good. If your large and medium shapes look good in stylized pieces, then your stylized piece will probably look good as well. And don't quote me on that, actually. You might still have problems. But yeah, so basically that's that. So yeah. So I guess that's my approach to stylization. And let's see, what is our final thing here? Modeling and texturing. Ooh, okay. So for modeling and texturing, I went with a pretty regular approach. I pretty much just had this Maya file and I brought in my blockouts from Unreal into here. Usually, if I wanted to replace something that I didn't think was successful in the blockout, I would sorry, 1 second. I would make it in Maya, but most of the stuff I just brought in as a blockout. And so, like for this, I use this as size ref because I need to see, like, because everything was blocked out in Unreal and not in Maya, which is also a method, I kind of had to bring it in here for size reference and make the actual model over this piece because this piece is pretty broken. And yeah, that's pretty much how I approached that. most of the models I made, except for all the foliage, were sculpted in ZBrush. So you see here I have one of my tree pieces. I also have the other big tree here with like how I made it. And again, this is all like, you see, I didn't really carve into this with smaller detail because it's in the background and I didn't really plan on you seeing any of the details. So it would have been pointless of me to spend like 3 years carving, like doing the same thing treatment I did to this one. Instead, I just decided to leave it kind of blank. And that works because you're just seeing the silhouette and all the shapes. And my focus was more on that. And you could see like there's some really cool twisting vines here that create a lot of cool silhouettes. And that's mainly the point with Stylized, is just try to get those nice, like crisp silhouettes. So yeah. So after I took it into ZBrush, I would take it into, sorry I have so many different trees, but I'm not very organized with like my files. So yeah, so I have this tree here, and this one right here. Ooh, my camera's fast. This one right here, and yeah, pretty much how the approach to texturing is, well, one, I have a very good crutch, and you guys could probably find this on Gumroad or just going to his channel. This is a 3DX stylized material, and I use this sometimes to kind of get a base for my stylized textures, or stylized textures, and then everything else I just do over it. So kind of just add on to this. I treat it almost like a painting on Photoshop. Whenever you're painting, you're working with layers, so you're trying to play around with opacity, brush strokes, all that, and that's kind of how I got this final product here. Again, you could see that the fundamental that I talked about earlier about only focusing on medium and small is applying here. Like these large tree bark sections where the bark is kind of like splitting, they're really big. They're like big shapes. There's not really any small like chipped tree bark. It's just really from a distance it should read, but when up close it doesn't really have to read. Especially if your environment is not a close-up shot of any kind. Like here, you see the trees from so far away that it doesn't even. It's the same thing as this. You still see them, so I have to make them pretty good regardless, but not to the extent of a realistic piece. So yeah, that's kind of how I approach modeling for all modeling and texturing for all the pieces in this. I focused on color a lot and trying to make sure the color in the final was the same as the color from the beginning. And you could see that it actually is pretty similar. Not to this one, more to this one. It's pretty similar, especially when I put the blue here. You could see it pretty much stayed the same way. Like we have the yellow building, still yellow. The green tree, still green. The green foliage for the ground here. Obviously, I added a little bit more coloring, and that's good because it actually breaks up some of these large shapes that I had at the beginning. But yeah, it's just basically as long as you have a good base, the rest is just filling in the blanks. It's like when you have like a good line art, everything else is just filling in the blank. You're just coloring and trying to stay inside the lines. And that's pretty much how I approached this piece as a whole. What else? What else have I not mentioned? Oh, yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about foliage, and then I'm going to talk about the clouds because they're really important, and then I'll wrap it up because we're probably hitting close to home here. Yep. So, okay. So let's make this quick. So for foliage, I did not sculpt it. Instead, I just decided to make sure that the base color was good on all of them, and it actually worked out pretty well. I mean, I would say to sculpt it if you have the time and if you think it will look better in your piece, because sculpted foliage always looks better than just like foliage that doesn't have any detail. But again, for this piece, everything is kind of simple, so I kind of ran with that the entire way and just let the base color speak for the entire piece. With this foliage specifically, I'd use color tree variation to kind of get different colors and all. And right here you could see I just took this into Substance Painter and added a bunch of grunge noises to break up the greenness of it all, kind of give it like a yellow green, you know, a gradation of sorts. So yeah, that's what I did with the foliage. And finally, a big trick that helped out this entire thing, that honestly, without it, it probably wouldn't be as successful of a piece. All these planes, all of them, and you can see them better when it's back here, they're just cloud alphas with depth fade. And this really is like the making point for my environment, and it really just tied everything together, because without it, let me show you real quick. Without it, boom, it kind of loses a lot. You know, it loses the painterliness of it all. It had like this cool opacity to it, but with it, it's just night and day. Honestly, the difference is night and day. So using these cloud mask alpha cards really saved my life. And if you want like a full description of it, basically what I did is, first I had these clouds, very cute, very quick cloud meshes that I made on ZBrush. They're nothing too fancy, but they add like this highlight definition that you really need for clouds. And I then went to Maya and used the VFX Fluid Sims, a 2D container, and messed around with the settings here, the density and the velocity and the turbulence, etc., to kind of get like a cloud shape. And this is really, honestly, this is really cool for making clouds. I know there's so many ways to make clouds, but I really enjoyed this process, and it was kind of new to me to do it this way. And yeah, I would just basically let this simulate and then grab this and make it a cloud alpha by taking it to Photoshop and adjusting some of the values. And then I would just toss it into here onto my material. Again, like I said, with a depth fade. It's really a simple material, honestly. It's just here. Let me show you quickly. Let me show you guys. All right, so yeah, it's basically just a tint, basically a 3-color with a multiply, and then the alpha card, then another multiply and some depth fade, and then 2 parameters, one for opacity and one for depth fade on the opacity mask. And yeah, that's all you need really. And it's really extremely helpful for just adding some fog in your scene. Fog is really important. It's atmospheric. You want to have atmosphere. Atmosphere is like one of the most important things in an environment, and it's really good to focus in on that sometimes. Especially because you could have a lot of control over the color and over the values of your scene. Like I said, if I take all of these away again, let me show you guys again. It's honestly like night and day. It really just, look at how dark this becomes. Look at how in your face this building in the back becomes. It just all becomes too contrasty, and it just doesn't work as well. So yeah. Yeah, that's a really big part of this piece, and without it, it wouldn't have been as successful. And so I think I've gone over everything I've wanted to go over. Thank you guys for watching this tutorial breakdown. I hope you guys were able to learn something, and thank you Stylized Station for allowing me to make this for you and just encouraging this. Thank you to all the fans, and I hope you guys learned something. Peace out. I love you all. Bye-bye.